Church Without Walls. I'm John Kirkwood, and this is my partner.
I'm Poe.
I'm Poe. I got to go back to our graphic because I actually am pretty impressed. Our graphic for this morning is I'm a Christian, but it's complicated. So this is something that you said, right, in school to somebody? You want to tell us how it happened? What?
I think I was in my 5th period English class, and a friend of mine asked what I am religious or something. Stuff like that came up.
Yeah.
And they said that.
So, to you, why is it complicated? Because, just curious.
Because
Did he ask that? Did he just let it go
They-
at that, or?
but they are just I think religion came up. I'm not sure in what context. And then they asked about mine, and I said that because just the word Christian has isn't it's not the best word that you hear, because you think you a lot of bad stuff when you hear that. But I am one, and I don't think I'm one of the ones that I
Storms the Capitol
yeah I
with
don't
crazy
wanna
horn
I didn't want to
hats.
say
Yeah.
that, but yeah.
Yeah, I think it carries baggage, and I know that there are fellow believers. There's even apologists who make videos saying that this is a bad vibe to be running away from the evangelical or the Christian label, and you can't love Jesus unless you love the church. So let me start there, because I do think that the term carries baggage. So the idea that you can't love Jesus unless you love his bride, frankly, is ridiculous. We've all met people in real life whom we loved one of them. We might have loved the wife and thought the husband was this, grade 5 jackass. Either way. But when the church is something, when the bride is something that represents, an untold number of people over at least the past 2,000 years, it's going to vary in how it is viewed by the surrounding public. For example, there's not a conservative evangelical Christian nationalist today who would accept the flavor and the vibe of the church under the Borgia popes, right? They only want to believe that the church wasn't even birthed in Acts 9. They want to believe that the church was birthed in post-Reformation, that the Catholics aren't really a part of the church, and all that crazy history isn't in our luggage, but it is. And so, if you were in France, if you were a Huguenot in France at the time that the church was driving you from your homes and, confiscating your property, even at the end of a sword, you might not be endeared to the church, right? If you were at the wrong end of the sword in some of the Crusades and the Inquisitions, in the periods where the church has been criminal, which you don't have to look very deep into church history to see that this has been kind of a cycle. Whenever the church gets power, right, it seems not to do very well with it. And the church always seems to blossom when itself is powerless and persecuted. And then it seems to not forget that which is our first love, right? It seems to get that the church is at its best when our heart beats with the pulse of Jesus Christ, when we reach out to the oppressed and we bring in the marginalized and we tend to the wounds and we free the captives, and not when we're trying to rule governments and change policies and storm the Capitol and and that kind of thing. So I get this understand. You know, when you said this to me, when you were telling me about your day, and you said that this was your answer, it didn't make me cringe. It kind of made me proud. It kind of made me proud that you have that kind of discernment, you know, at such a young age, and that you have that kind of empathy towards your hearer, toward the person you're talking with, because nobody wants to be dismissed. And one of the reasons I don't like this question, like "What are you?" Is because it's normally meant to cut corners on getting to know a person. It's normally meant as a cheat code to find out if I'm going to like you or not, or if you're worth listening to or not, or should I respect you or not. So normally I don't try and dodge this question, but I would try and reframe it, because you know, this idea that we live within a label. Last week we talked about labels a little bit when we talked about the word Christian, you know, claiming to be a Christian or to be a Christ follower. There's many people today, especially in North America and in the United States of America, who are so ashamed of what the evangelical label has come to mean that they don't carry it anymore, and they don't defend it anymore, and they're not trying to, you know, breathe new life into it. They've abandoned it because, you know, it's the house is overrun with termites, and there's nothing you can do but bulldoze it. And there's some people who have even gotten to that point when it comes to the term Christian. And it's not that they think less of Christ or of the Bible or of even their church community. It's that they don't want to be dismissed or have to carry the baggage. They're not comfortable being in the team picture with that crazy guy with the horned hat who was stormed the Capitol and was like offering a prayer to Jesus Christ and white supremacy. That's just, yeah, I don't want to be in that team picture either. I'm not comfortable there. I'm not comfortable in a lot of team pictures that go by the label Christian. Oftentimes when I'll hear a debate, for example, between a Christian and an atheist, 95% of the time I'm with the atheist, just because the Christian they're debating is somebody who doesn't worship the same God as me. You know, well, let me say this. I had a controversial show a couple of years ago when I discussed the question pastors often get is, do Muslims worship the same God as we, or do Mormons, or do Jews? And this kind of question is another question that sets us apart and wants to divide us. But my answer to that usually is, well, Christians don't worship the same God as other Christians. Christians have a variety depending on their theology of what God looks like. And to be honest with you, and I say this not to hurt my Reformed friends, but the Calvinist God is a monster God. And when the atheist is debating the Calvinist and he brings up some of these monstrous characteristics of the Calvinist rendering, the modern 5-point Calvinist rendering of this determinist God, it is much closer in my mindset to the God of Islam, to Allah, than it is the God I understand through Jesus Christ, where I see Jesus Christ as the fullness of the Godhead bodily. And he's nothing like the cold, sovereign God of my Calvinist friends. And so, yeah, do Christians even worship the same God? That's a question that people don't like fielding when they're trying to distinguish us from those Muslims, from those rascally Muslims, or from Mormons who we're trying to distance from, or even Catholics. I've heard this said about our Catholic brothers and sisters. We don't worship the same. So it's kind of a loaded question. I'm reminded of, actually, Poe comes home from school, and every day her social studies teacher, Mr. Mills, does a quote of the day. And I don't think it was long ago he did one from Eleanor Roosevelt. But my favorite quote from Mrs. Roosevelt is great minds discuss ideas. Average minds discuss events, and small minds discuss people. So this is just kind of something I'm putting out there for you. If you feel awkward when somebody asks you that question, it's normal because, you know, if there's anything that modern Christians don't do well, it's that we don't listen well. And what are you, or are you religious, tends to be one of those questions that doesn't make people feel comfortable. It makes them feel like on the witness stand, you know, like, or they have to defend something. The reason I like this graphic so much is there's a lot of people in that fishbowl, if you call that the Christian fishbowl, I don't want to be in a picture with. You know, I can imagine, for example, you know, a real German patriot during the time of the Reich who doesn't want to be affiliated in any way, even though they're proud to be a German and they're proud of their country and of their, you know, most of their history, and they love their neighbor. They don't want to be associated with the guys walking around in jackboots and crooked crosses. I get that. And so there are periods in church history where the church has become so notorious, so nefarious, so much of characterized as the people that God cursed in the Old Testament who carry his name in vain, who've taken his name in vain, that the actual person who does have an adoration and a respect for Jesus Christ feels cringeworthy when they're put in the same category or put in the same aisle of the grocery store. You know, for a while, people in the GOP, I used to be a Republican. Now I call myself an independent because of how outrageous the party has become. I know there are people that feel that way, both ways. There are certainly Democrats who at times have come into the middle and said, you know, I'm an independent now because this guy, I can't, you know, I don't want him to be a reflection of what I believe. So at this point, folks, I'm going to turn you over to Poe because I have to do something that will embarrass my wife. I do have a slight cold and I have to blow my nose. But I'm going to put you on Poe for a while so you could watch what she's doing with her watercolors.
Stage in my art. So
That's the ugly stage of your art. Well, folks, don't say that we aren't a grace-filled community here because it was a gracious act what I just did. I saved you from what was a very uncomfortable experience. Trust me on that one. Where were we?
Spare me.
I didn't spare you. Well, you gave me the cold. So there's that.
Yeah.
Where were we? So, folks, a lot of our conversation, I mean, Poe was in a conversation with just a fellow student, and he just wanted to get to know her better. And you know, sometimes children don't know any better than to ask those same questions they hear their parents ask. It's kind of like, you know, if we're at a dinner party and things are a little bit awkward and somebody will say to you, you know, what do you do for a living or something, you know, as if that can encapsulate who you are as an individual. But it might just be an icebreaker. It might just be something to get conversation flowing. Certainly, that doesn't mean that they're judgmental or trying to trap you, but oftentimes these questions really don't produce the kind of effect that they're meant to. So I'm not trying to attack anyone's intention. I'm just trying to say I understand if it makes you uncomfortable, you know, using that kind of a label. And how do you deflect it, or how do you change the subject matter? That's why one of the reasons I like the term Christ follower. Even Gandhi, who wasn't a Christian, was a Christ follower. He was enamored with the person of Christ. There are atheists who find the story of Christ exhilarating and the greatest story ever told, even though they don't believe he was the Son of God. And this, I think, is the common ground where a lot of us can park and not feel uncomfortable or cringeworthy, and really open up great conversations to something that's much more important than the label we carry, right? Because isn't that what we truly want? We truly want, if we take the words of our Lord seriously, to connect, not just to live in this world, but to connect with our neighbors and to heal the breach or the breaches that surround us when it comes to even our enemies, perceived or real. I can think that, Jesus never used that kind of thing. Jesus didn't sit next to the woman on the well and say, "What are you? Are you a Samaritan?" Most Jews wouldn't talk to Samaritans. He probably knew she was a Samaritan by the way she was dressed and where they were before he ever sat down to talk to her. And the only way you're going to break down barriers is if you stop directing them yourself. And avoid those kind of things that put people on edge. And, you could, if you wanted to broach the topic of faith, even though there's probably some situations where you don't, in a work setting or what have you, but if for some reason it comes up, or if you're curious, I remember, and this is a story that Peyton will love because she made kata for him this Christmas, but I remember I have many vices, and one of them is I enjoy a good cigar now and again. And driving home one day down Algonquin Road towards Randall, I saw a sign for a cigar shop, and I had some time, and so I pulled into the parking lot and I approached the door, and I saw some signs on the door that immediately endeared me to the owner. And I walked in and I mentioned that to him, and we began to talk. But I noticed that he had a certain Middle Eastern look about him. And I said, "Do you mind if I ask what nationality are you?" Or I think I might have said, where were you from originally? Some people could get on edge about that, too. So that you got to be careful how you answer that. But we had kind of established a rapport. We're laughing. We had kind of established a rapport before I asked him that. And he said, "Well, I'm from Syria." So here's the thing I knew immediately, because he was wearing a cross around his neck. So if you're a Middle Eastern man from Syria, you're going to be either a Christian or a Muslim. And I don't want to offend him if he's a Muslim, because certainly he was a great guy. And I've met Muslim people and establishments before that I've struck up a friendship with. But I saw he was wearing a cross, and I know that if you're an Assyrian, I know that if you're a Christian in that area of the world, then you're most likely an Assyrian. And so I said, "Are you don't happen to be Assyrian, do you?" Because I'm half Assyrian on my mother's side. And he said, and he just lit up. He just lit up because he was surprised that somebody off the street would know he's an Assyrian. And Jack was an Assyrian, and we struck up a friendship then. And that's one of the main things I miss about Chicago is ST Cigars on Algonquin Road in Algonquin. So, but that was an approach. I mean, you got to kind of feel it out. You got to establish a rapport, I think, before you go there. And I let Jack know I'm an Assyrian, and he was an Assyrian. And that doesn't, you could meet people that are your same nationality that are just dogs of a people, that are just horrible people, and who are unscrupulous in business and all that. But now Jack is salt of the earth, and he's Assyrian, so that makes it even better. But so I'm not just saying, I'm Italian too. Every Italian I meet isn't salt of the earth. But how did I get on that subject?
I don't know.
You don't know, do you? But one of the reasons I don't have like Christian bumper stickers is because I'm not the best driver, and I don't want people to have any reason to have something against Jesus just because this guy with the ichthys on the back of his bumper, or what my favorite Jesus sticker is, Poe?
What?
Jesus loves you, but everyone else thinks you're a jerk. That I might put on the back of a truck, although I hate bumper stickers. If I had an RV, maybe I'd put that on my RV. But no, I don't have Jesus stickers or anything like that. One reason I hate bumper stickers, but the other reason is I don't want to bring shade on my Lord because I cut somebody off, or I drove too slow, or I drove too fast, or I didn't signal my lane change, or whatever. However else I drive poorly. That's all I wanted to say today.
I need a little more time.
This is kind of a creepy watercolor, what you're doing here.
Thank you.
I mean, it's kind of haunting. It doesn't look bright and cheerful. It looks like a mob that's approaching, almost like, are they zombies? Or what kind of, let me show you this, people. I'm not wrong, am I? It's dark. It's kind of creepy. Are they coming to stone Jesus? Or what are they doing? Are they tracking down, Joel and Ellie here? Are they runners or stalkers or clickers or
tweakers?
Or tweakers. So what actually is it? You want to talk about this right now?
Yeah. I don't know.
Well, I'll give you another minute because I want to wrap this up.
Okay.
So I'm a Christian, but it's complicated. I love that as a response from Peyton because it kind of gives the person the information, but it also does so with a caveat. Like, okay, maybe, because let's face it, folks, here's something that's a fact. The vast majority of our fellows in America, when they're polled, don't think well of Christians. Now, I'm not talking about people who are in the tribe, who are rah-rah Asbury Revival Christians. I'm talking about our neighbors who aren't Christians when they're polled about us, and even some of them who are. They say when they think of the church or when they think of the term Christian, the first thing that comes to their mind is either hypocrisy or judgmentalism. Either they're bigots and they hate gay people, or they're hypocrites, like the SBC and the Catholic priest scandal and all that, and they're stealing money and they're misusing power, and they're no different than the Hollywood people in the Me Too movement, and they're trying to cover it up and hide it. There's so much bad press for the American church, or they're storming the Capitol, because Donald Trump is the 13th apostle. There's so much baggage with the term Christian these days. I like that Poe kind of phrased it that way because she's kind of saying, wait a minute, don't put me into that pigeonhole of what you might think a Christian is.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say earlier.
Yeah, and it kind of keeps the conversation more open-ended, doesn't it? Where
That's
you can
what I
follow
wanted.
where somebody might say, well, why is it complicated? And then you could say what I just said. You could just say, well, look, I'm enamored with the person of Christ and with the teaching that he brought to us. If Jesus is the fullness of the Godhead bodily, then I see a lot of compassion, empathy. I see somebody who is a good listener. I see somebody who is trying to break down walls between partisan groups. I see somebody who is trying to elevate women when in his culture they were not viewed as as they should be, and that to me is really the fascinating thing. What Christ said and did and the effect that he's had, which can't be dismissed. Now, some people say it's been a bad effect, and certainly in some corners it has. But I don't think it's been a bad effect when you consider his person and his words. I just think it's been bad when theologians have twisted his person and his words because they are interested, they have a power lust that they want to exert over other people, and they claim to speak for God because they know that a large segment of society will listen more if they tag their message with Jesus. More people will buy the dish detergent if it's Jesus approved. And so there's been a con game, there's been a shell game in Christianity, as with anything else that's influential, that people try and use for their own ends. And the church has done this, and this is a dark chapter in American Christianity. It's as dark as it was when the Southern churches and the Southern Christians were using the Bible and using their Christian faith to underlie the institution of slavery, to say that God's okay with slavery, he regulates it, and this is why you should have this view and respect this view because it's our faith, and it's been your faith, and that's been a tradition as well, and it's been a tradition since the dawn of time. And so this is what the Southern Church was doing. They had the Bible on their side, even though there were others who would say, well, there's verses in the Bible that attack that too. So they had the Bible, they had their faith, they had tradition, and they were using all of that to keep, not only to keep their fellows in chains, but to keep their neighbors in line. And so this was a dark chapter. I know there were Christians on both sides of the Civil War, and they both used the Bible for inspiration. I think Abraham Lincoln did it in the right way. South of the Mason-Dixon, not so much. So if you want to separate yourself from a conversation-ending question, don't answer loaded questions. Take that page out of our Lord's strategy book of tactics, and probe a little deeper when somebody asks you what you are, and say, well, I'm ever changing, I'm evolving. That's an interesting question. What do you mean by what do you consider yourself? And how did you come to the understanding of where you are in your faith? I don't mind telling. I love talking about my faith journey. I really do. But I don't want it to end. You've all been in conversation with people when they find out you're a Democrat, they don't want anything to do with you, or they find out you're a Republican, and they just assume you're Bill O'Reilly, and they just want to walk away from you. And there's a contempt. There's a contempt that wasn't there before you answered the question, or there's a dismissive attitude that wasn't there before you answered the question. So I do think that loving our neighbor means that we don't answer just every question that comes from our neighbor, that we care enough to try and nurture the conversation beyond those obstacles that are going to lead to a detour or a dead end. Now I'm done. Now we're going to go back to Poe. Which camera do you want?
First, let me talk.
First, let me talk. All right. Go ahead.
So, the kid I was talking to...
Oh, I'm listening. Yeah.
The kid I was talking to, the way they look at it was that they believe there's something out there, but they're not sure what. And then when I asked more about it, the way they explained it was if they pick one and it's the wrong one, they don't want to be punished for it.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. I wish you would have said that earlier in the show. We could have made that the show. Maybe we'll make that next week's show. That idea that if there is a God worthy of worship, he's going to punish you if you get it wrong.
Yeah, and then I tried to, I was talking to them, and I was like, if there is a God, why would they punish us for
Not knowing.
living? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something I'd like to do in story form, because if you view God as a father, right? If a father found an estranged child, a long lost child, maybe his mother took the child when he was young away from you, and it took you years to find that child, and the mother told that child that you didn't exist, or that you had died, or that you were a creep, and that's why she took you away. If you find that child, and that child thinks poorly of you, you're not going to punish him for it. You might try and set the record straight and say, no, I have nothing but love for you, and I want to have a relationship with you now. But the last thing you're going to do is punish him. And that's to me, is when people who try and think how God is get it wrong. And that's when, and you could kind of plot this out, Poe, in the Bible, when, for example, when the Jewish people, when the Israelites were under judges for each tribe, then all their writing about God, their theology is, well, God's a judge, and God's a judge. And then kings came into the picture, and then all their writing was, well, God's a king, right? And then Jesus comes into the picture, and Jesus makes him our Father. And he doesn't dismiss the fact that God, an aspect of God is judgment, or an aspect of God is, sovereign, that he's a ruler, but he's primarily setting the picture that, no, God is our Father, and if he's our Father, then what does a father act like? He's going to be the best father there could be. And so a father wouldn't punish a child, even a strange child, for not knowing that he's that child's father.
And
so that was good.
Yeah. A little bit after that, this other girl sitting at the table got out her Bible and started saying, well, this kid, you have a biblical name. Why don't we find your book? And another thing that annoyed me, they kept referring to it as a chapter, but
it's a book. Yeah.
So we found their name, and when we found it, and they were starting to read their book a little bit, they kept talking about the worst parts of the Bible, and kept talking about, like, God and Jesus in this, like, horrible dark light. And they were taking the chance to read their book, even if they don't agree with the Bible. But then, even though they were reading it, even though they don't agree with it, they were still looking at it, not giving it a chance, just looking at it with this bad light, this dark light.
Let's talk about that next week, because I've been meaning to talk about that, and how people can dismiss the Bible because of those bad passages, and how Christians just read over those passages and pretend they're not there. So let's talk about that next week. Will you remind me? Because my memory's not good.
You better remind yourself.
Well, folks, let me just say this. I used to make fun of the people. My mother, God rest her soul, she was such a sweet woman. My mother used to have one of those boxes that you have on the counter, and it had like 365 cards in it, and you'd take a card out every day, and you'd read the verse, and every verse was great. You couldn't find one of those bad passages in it at all, like smash the Babylonian babies' heads against the wall to the glory of God. You didn't see any of that. And I used to make fun of that, because when I believed the Bible was one voice, and the Holy Spirit edited it, and every verse was equal to every other verse, when I didn't see the Bible as a library and I saw it as a book, I used to say, well, this little box isn't teaching the whole counsel of God, that we've got to teach those other verses too. But now I look at it the other way, and I say, no, that was the right way. That was the right way. That's the right way to approach the Bible. Not that I ignore the bad passages, but I realize that there's a human component in the library that we call the Bible, and they got it wrong. Because you know how I know? Because if Jesus is the fullness of the Godhead bodily, and that verse doesn't match the Jesus in his words and actions, then it ain't God.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So we'll talk about that next week.
Well, another thing, when they started talking about that, I looked at them and I said, God isn't all of his men. The followers and the people in the book are separate from him, not him. They may follow him, but not everything they say is like literally his word.
True. Well, and it's like that in every group because, even like, say, let's pick a political party among Republicans. There's a wide range of views of Republicans. There's some people who are Republicans solely because they like gun ownership. And they're Second Amendment Republicans. And there's some Republicans who are pro-life, and that's their main thing. And there's some Republicans who are greedy, and they really are. They're called country club Republicans. All they care about is that part of the Republican Party that deals with small government or taxes. And so they could be leagues different from each other and still walk under the same banner. And to treat Christians as like just this cookie cutter kind of a group is crazy, because there are Christians in that team picture, in that fishbowl, that I don't want anything to do with, because I mean, I don't believe that they're following the Christ that I adore and worship. And and they probably don't believe that about me. So anyway, that's what today was about. So jump out of the fishbowl. Let's talk about the Bible next week.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching, folks. Oh, wait. We got
forget.
Poe's thing. What do we got here?
Maybe this would be a better camera.
Better camera? That one?
Yeah.
Okay, do you want to tell us what this is? What this lynch mob is doing? Yeah.
I don't know. The image kind of just came to
It
me,
emotes.
and
Well, let me tell you what I
painted
see.
it.
Can I tell you what I see,
Yeah.
and you tell me what it is? Now that I look closer, it looks like they're in robes. It reminds me maybe a religious group of people, and yet I do like the sunny faces a little bit. But the dark sky, and then I don't know what to think here. And then this one kind of looks like it might be a female because of the hair. And so a female in a robe is a lot less scary to me than like a bunch of dudes in robes, because that usually never ends well. A bunch of dudes in robes usually ends with a pile of rocks and somebody dead under it, or somebody hanging from a tree, or like some weird like Satanist occult thing. So I
Well,
don't know.
actually, what I was more trying to display here is not a cult,
Okay.
but just a group of people who may all look similar, because they're not wearing robes. They're just kind of like blob people,
Blob people.
like kind of abstract.
Yeah.
But how they all look similar, but they're all like really different.
Oh.
Really, they're all diverse. You know, they may
Okay.
look so similar.
Well, don't
but
get me wrong.
they
I
may
love it. I think it's really striking, and it emotes a deep conversation as to what it is. Obviously, as we just had one.
Yeah.
And that's what I think art is at its best when it does that. So,
Thank you.
all right, Poe, are we done? See you next week, folks.